What's up, y'all? Welcome to Flames Reaction Channel. So today's video, I'm getting ready to react Fat Joe. And with that being said, make sure you hit that like, comment, and subscribe. And let's go ahead and dig into this video and check out Fat Joe and some of his greatest moments of hip hop.
I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't know how to hammer a nail. I don't know how to fix a car. I don't know how to bake a cake. This is what I do.
One of hip-hop's most influential Latino superstars, Fat Joe, would emerge out of the Bronx during the 90s and forge a reputation for himself one gangsta album at a time. After discovering the massive talent of Big Pun, Joe would form Terror Squad. And while the group didn't stick around all that long, it left a very big impression before it was through. In the early 2000s, Fat Joe would continue to climb the charts, but this time he did it largely by moving further into pop music than ever before. And while Joe's productivity has dropped off over the past decade, he shifted gears and become one of the most impactful and influential voices for a new generation of upcoming artists. Whether he's rapping alongside Remy Ma or Cool and Dre, if Fat Joe lends his voice to a track, people tend to listen. Think you know how Fat Joe once saved Common's life? Then drop the story in the comments down below before we get into it. Otherwise, sit back and enjoy our newest episode of Where Are They Now? Fat Joe was born and raised Joseph Cartagena on August 19, 1970 in the South Bronx. As a kid growing up Puerto Rican and of Cuban heritage, Joe's older brother would teach him how to survive on the streets. But it was his passion for music that would teach him how to transcend his humble beginnings.
Hey yo, it's not dark. Pass the mic and it's gonna get sparked. You know, Fat Joe was fat, far from lean, kicking the freestyle on the music machine.
Joe first discovered hip-hop while attending block parties around his neighborhood and listening to groundbreaking artists like Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, as well as Grand Wizard Theodore and Funky 4+1.
I spent a lot of my life in the clubs, and plenty of time you might have thought I was shaking my ass or I was hanging out. I was studying the room, what people reacted to, what people. It's like being in a college, a professor.
Inspired by these revolutionary acts, Joe would take to calling himself Fat Joe to Gangsta and secure himself a recording contract with the label known as Relativity in the early 90s. This partnership would result in his first full-length project, Represent, which dropped in 1993 and included the single Flow Joe, which topped the Billboard's Hot Rap Singles chart and became the first time many people ever heard the name Fat Joe. It would take Joe 2 years to capitalize on his initial success, but then he returned with his sophomore effort, Jealous One's Envy. This project was most memorable for including the first appearance of Big Pun, a fellow rapper from the Bronx who Joe discovered on the city streets and then created an entire hip-hop collective around, known as the Terror Squad. Around this same time, Joe had just signed a massive deal with Atlantic, and he brought every member of Terror Squad along with him. His first major release on the album, 1998's Don Cartagena, would feature Terror Squad all coming together for the first track, The Hidden Hand. Couple that with additional appearances from the likes
That's
of
my
Puff Daddy
favorite song from
Nas,
Fat Joe.
and his third studio album became Joe's first to reach the top 10
The
of
Hidden
Billboard
Hand
200.
is one of the
Unfortunately, when
greatest
Terror
song
Squad
I ever
finally
heard
dropped their
from
self-titled
Fat
debut
Joe's
album in 1999, the sales numbers were far from overwhelming. Shortly thereafter, Big Pun would die of a heart attack. Terror Squad didn't exactly come to an end at this point in time, but it might as well have. If you want to hear more about what happened to them, then be sure to check out our recent Where Are They Now that looks specifically into the history of Terror Squad. As for Joe, well, after Big Pun's death, he began to concentrate more and more on his solo career. In the early 2000s, he'd create much more radio-friendly songs by teaming up with the likes of Ashanti for What's Love or We Thuggin' with R. Kelly. Outside of music, Joe was making waves too. He tried his hand at opening a clothing store, creating his own fashion line, and even financing a barbershop. Imagine going into a Fat Joe barbershop and it's like, the price one day is different from... Anyways, it's a good meme, right? You better not include that, Alex.
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
After creating his 2002 album Loyalty, Joe would show some love and circle back to his Terror Squad members to release their second studio album, which included the gigantic hit Lean Back. This track would top the Hot 100 and earn a Grammy nomination for Best Rap Performance by a duo or group. Regardless, it would be the last real Terror Squad album to this day. After a series of projects in the late 2000s in which Joe would continue to work with mainstream acts like Lil Wayne for Make It Rain and Akon on One, Joe would make a triumphant return to his gangster roots in 2010 when he unleashed The Dark Side, a throwback to his earliest hardcore days. Over the next few years, Joe would continue to dabble in the dark side, creating self-issued sequel mixtapes but for the most part, in the 2010s, he largely began appearing with other up-and-coming artists to provide the Fat Joe bump. He backed his good friend and Terror Squad protege Remy Ma in 2016's All the Way Up from their compilation album Plataploma. And then he teamed up with Dre of Cool and Dre in 2019 to drop a compilation album known as Family Ties. Once the pandemic hit in 2020, Joe was contemplating hanging up the microphone to spend more time with his family. During an interview with CBS News, he told them, "I think I'm retiring. It's time to give it up. I've got mad at all the other rappers who've said they're retiring and came back. No, I'm a strong advocate against that. So I've been flirting with it. I'm like 85% gone." While we were all stuck in our homes, Joe took to entertaining us, not through music, but through a new venture called The Fat Joe Show, in which he interviewed key people in the pandemic news cycle like AOC and Dr. Anthony Fauci. Of course, since this was called The Fat Joe Show, we also got interviews with the likes of Floyd Mayweather, Jamie Foxx, and Snoop Dogg. By the time 2021 came rolling around, Joe was back to making music and showing up in the singles like Sunshine, featuring DJ Khaled, with the Amorphous, as well as Back Outside with Remy Ma and Cool and Dre. So much for retirement, huh? Well, when you've created a lasting legacy like Fat Joe's, it's hard to turn it off. Ever since Joe first emerged in the hip-hop scene, he's had a lasting impact. For instance, Joe recently shared a throwback picture on social media of himself posted up with the likes of Biggie, Lil' Kim, Diddy, and Bone Thugs-n-Harmony. I mention this because in the caption he posted alongside this image, Joe took credit for helping create one of Biggie's most infamous tracks, Notorious Thugs. This opening track on disc 2 of Biggie's album, Life After Death, featured Bone Thugs-n-Harmony, and apparently Biggie had to reach out to Joe to set the whole thing up. Joe also revealed during an interview with Swizz Beatz and Timbaland that he and Biggie were set to create a joint project with another right before Biggie was killed. And guess what? It was apparently loaded with Tupac disses.
You know, I worked on an album with Biggie. We cut about 5 songs together. He was like, "You the Latino Dawn, I'm the Black Dawn." And we was in that studio going crazy. It's verified by Puff Daddy and everybody.
Big surprise, right? But Biggie's not the only gigantic star that owes Fat Joe a little something. Rapper extraordinaire Common recently revealed that Joe once saved his life. Back in the 90s, Common was dissing West Coast rappers left, right, and center on his single, Used to Love Her. Something that apparently infuriated the West Coast legend Ice Cube, so Cube hit back with a diss track of his own, West Side Slaughterhouse. Kinda subtle, right? This track featured Mac 10, who Common would later bump into during the filming of a Sprite commercial. When a friend of Common's decided to score up against the guy on Common's behalf, Fat Joe showed up and told Common that if he didn't get his friend to leave, bad things were about to happen.
Ross, you know they was ready to get you. They was ready to get you for real. Like, I was like, man, and he said I had to talk to them. I had to sit down and say, because them was his guys. He was cool with Mac 10 and them. He's like, man, y'all ain't touching him. You know, blah, blah, blah.
Now, that wasn't a threat from Joe. He was simply just trying to make Common aware that Mac 10 and his friends were out for blood. And if it hadn't been for Joey Crack, Common may very well have gotten pulled into the ensuing conflict and not be around today. With a career as long as Fat Joe has had, I'm sure there are a ton more stories like that are going to emerge over the years. But as for where Fat Joe goes next, well, that's a story for another time and another place. After all, this is Where Are They Now?
All right, y'all, that's it for this video, and I'm out. Peace.